What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the show. Today, I'm sitting with Andrew Frawley. He is the former director of marketing with the Yang 2020 campaign. He's now moved on, doing some cool stuff. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, Jordan. Thanks for having me on to share some things with everyone.
Yeah, man. I want to jump as much as Yang 2020 became this phenomenon almost, right? And this this grassroots movement that became a national movement, and you utilizing social media. I want to take it back to the start. How did you get the gig, and what were you thinking, like when you got it, right? When you sat down, where you're like, okay, here are our goals, like what were those, like, because, and then I want to get into how it really took a life of its own, and then see if there's some tactics or like those aha moments that you had. But walk
Yeah.
me back to the start when you're like, did you see a job post on LinkedIn, or like what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was all actually extremely like serendipitous and felt meant to be for me. In college, I actually applied to Yang's nonprofit Venture for America. I wanted to get training from good entrepreneurs, and I got rejected. So I moved to San Francisco to work in neuroscience aspirationally, but couldn't get a job. I lived in a hacker house with 50 people because I thought that was a good idea to have, hackery type friends. And long story short, compressed, I have this big existential crisis out there. I'm wondering what to do with my life. I start thinking about like mental health and big social systems. My roommates are talking about artificial intelligence. I get really jazzed up about the two of them. And I'm on a trip to New York City. I meet Andrew Yang. Uh, it's kind of crazy. That's a whole story. And we just hit it off. And he's like, hey, man, like, I got this big project coming up. And I'm like, what is it? And he's like, oh, I'm going to run for president. Like, do you want to join? And I was like, what? And it took me 3 months to say yes because I'm actually uh, grew up very upset with politics per se, very politically disenchanted. But I eventually said yes, and I just joined as the second person in 2017 December, working out of his mother's apartment, me, him, and one other person. And we didn't really have clearly defined roles. Like I was vaguely doing everything external. And we set up the campaign for launch. Like we copied the code from Bernie Sanders' website and like, set it up and all that. The goals early on were like super unknown. Like we really were just going for it. I mean, total startup mentality of like just sort of launch. We had a loose idea of like four target markets, which were like, techies, young people, Asian people, and supporters of UBI. And then we just went for it and like no one cared. And then we started adding some people to the team. Zach Rahman became our campaign manager, and then we got a chief of staff, and there was like five of us, 4.5. There was a contractor, and for like all of 2018, we just like lived in total obscurity. And I took on like a more formal like marketing manager type role. I was the only one doing marketing, but so just man of one. And I've read all the books like Ryan Holiday and Seth Godin and all sorts of those things, and literally all those books, all those business books. And I was like, I'm going to hack this thing. And I lived in San Francisco. I don't know how many people on this podcast may be familiar with Josh Fetcher, his growth hacking community out in SF back in those glory days. I was like in deep, and I was like, I'm going to hack this thing. I'm going to blow this thing wide open and save the campaign and all of humanity. And then I just like got nowhere. I mean, I literally spent 2018 working my face off, 80 hours a week, just going nowhere. I mean, doing all the things, every little tiny thing that you think is going to get you an edge in marketing, trading up the chain, blog posts, reposting, like, commenting on other people's things, responding. I mean, literally was getting like 50 followers a week. And I was like, man, Yang's a pretty solid product and I can't sell this thing. And my self-esteem just went down very low because I was like, I clearly don't know what I'm doing. So I'll sort of like put a stamp on that because obviously, there's a whole crescendo that follows that into ideas on strategy. But if you have any comments, I'm happy to put it back to you.
I mean, was there ever a point where you thought about walking away, or was it just that the mission kind of outweighed it?
No, I mean, I never thought about walking away because I ultimately was just like, okay, well, this is the only thing that makes sense for me to do with my life because I cared a lot about the mission. Working with Andrew Yang was very exciting. Even when he was a nobody, he was very, I mean, he was still who he is. So I was like, wow, this guy's incredible. Um, and so I didn't think about walking away. I was like, this is the best way I can spend my time. But yeah, there was a lot of struggles as to like, why am I not able to grow our marketing at all? Um, and there were a lot of lessons derived from that for sure, which I could get into, which I later realized, in the sort of postmortem of the campaign, you can sort of see, each stage develop.
Yeah, I want to get into that, but first I want to talk about, I guess, like the inflection point that happens in the campaign. And okay, was it like you wake up one day and holy crap, things are working and there's mentions and there's CNN and like walk me through kind of like the you're trying all this stuff and now the growth kind of hits a hockey stick growth and it becomes not only about like a movement really starts to spark out of it.
Yeah.
Walk me through that from a marketing perspective on like, okay, things are moving fast. Was it that we got to grow the team? Fundraising's coming in. I got to like, we was there more were there more guardrails on things like commenting on blogs and stuff like that or tweets, or was it was there some more process that had to go in, or was it like, hey, this is what got us here, we're going to keep going? Walk me through that whole phase, which is very reminiscent of a lot of people listening will be like, yep, startup, something happened and they had to, I mean, and
Yeah.
politics is that on steroids. So yeah, walk me through that.
So in the growth phase, I mean, that there's no shortage of guardrails that started popping up, and there were some very existential questions about who we are, how do we continue to grow. Uh, I mean, a political election turns out to be a marketing challenge like one I've never conceived because you literally have to go from, well, for what we had to do, we had to go from total obscurity to total mainstream adoption. I mean, like complete total mainstream adoption. Um, and the phases of that your product needs to go through. I mean, if you think about going from niche to like, CNN mainstream, it's very challenging. And there were a lot of questions that we asked there. I mean, I think it's probably best to start with what got us there. So in 2018, when nothing was working, we were trying so we expected people to care when he announced, and no one cared. And no one cared for a long time. And I thought I was going to be able to, um, sorry, I got a pop up saying that my connection like
Yeah.
connected or something.
No, wait, yeah, it didn't come back. We'll be good. If you just want to pick it up from, maybe let's go back to um, the start of that to say, yeah, it'd be like in 2018, be like, and then we went and we thought people would, if you just pick it up from, we thought people would care.
Yeah.
And if it happens again, you can keep chatting because it's going to record on both browsers. So
Oh, oh,
we
great.
should be good. So yeah,
Okay.
just keep, yeah, we get a disconnection, just keep going. But let's pick it up from there. We'll be able to chop all this out.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, taking it back, like when we launched, we thought people would care, and like nobody cared at all for a long time. And ultimately, the strategy was like we came out of the gate and we were doing a lot of outreach and things like that, like small outreach, because I was like, oh, I can just reach out to this one newspaper and they're going to pick us up and care, and then we'll get a hit, and that's good. And obviously, none of that worked. Like just nothing worked. So we also tried to do like a few small stunts and stuff, and no one cared. And so my personal strategy shifted in the fall of 2018 to being like, okay, what's very clear is nothing I can do is going to actually break this campaign out. This is purely going to be a game of like getting the product in like exponential settings. I mean, he was getting on, Bloomberg TV and a few other like TV hit pieces and things like that. And like literally nothing was happening. I mean, I couldn't believe like 3 visitors to your website. So we started to realize we were like, okay, like, if you just look at the challenge that we have, we have like 2 years to reach like 80 million people. Like, this isn't going to work. So we have to, your set of options becomes very narrow. Like the options that you have to actually grow become very small. And then I ultimately realized like, how can I impact those things? And it's like almost not at all. So I started just setting up all of our marketing infrastructure for the day we blew up. Um, And our attempts to break out were like, trying to get into like little political communities and things like that. But ultimately, the best idea that it's unknown who really came up with it. One person on the team says I was the one, but I actually don't remember doing it. I know I advocated for it hardcore, which was podcasts. I said like this is alternative media where people like sit down, they listen to new ideas, they're open to new ideas. They're underrepresented in politics, whatever. So we get on the Sam Harris podcast, and then we ultimately just become obsessed with Joe Rogan for like all of 2018. The second half, we're like, we just need to get Yang on Joe Rogan. That's like the one KPI of the year, because that's that, or like, we had a few other ideas, but we were like, that's the thing that could like be the potential, uh, linchpin or catalyst to some big moment. So, I probably spent 10 hours a week trying to do that to no avail. And the rest of my time was just setting up our marketing funnels because um, the ultimate vision was like, okay, once people show up, capture all the value. But my change in sort of marketing strategy was rather than funneling people to money and like selling, uh, like per se a product, aka the donation, I was just trying to build a community because my vision was like, right now we're a candidate with zero credibility, and that's why nothing works because he's a no-name guy with you know, zero name recognition and total obscurity. So you have sort of like four options in marketing, which is like you have legacy media, um, and like if you're in obscurity, no one cares. So you just like don't get on legacy media, which is like TV shows, CNN. Your second option is advertising, and if you're nobody, you probably don't have enough money to do advertising, which was us. But even if you did, your ads don't work at all. There was a guy named John Delaney who ran for president. He ran $200 million of ads and like didn't break 1% because he had no credibility. He was just like an obscure person. He had actually been a congressman, but really bad at marketing. But um, so then ads aren't really a good option. So we had tried a lot of stunts through 2018, and we ultimately learned that like stunts aren't really that helpful either. We even did that in 2019 when Yang went on the debate stage and was like, "I'm giving away free money to everyone," and like it didn't really do anything for us. I mean, we had a big spike of web traffic, and then everyone unsubscribed from our email list, and that was it. I mean, just like no one really cared. And
It's so interesting, right? Like, I think you're speaking to something that was that you guys did really well, but like instead of hey, vote for me, I'm XYZ candidate, it was join my community, be part of the movement. So it became an identity marker for voters of like I'm in the Yang gang. Like
yeah,
this is what I believe in, right? Also, when you look at things like I love this idea of setting up for the big moment, right? Um, if you go back and watch like any action movie or watch Rocky, right? This is just as they spend Rocky's why do we care about him winning the fights at the end?
yeah.
It's just the
Actually,
old man fighting, right? Yeah, and but the thing is, they set up that movie. The first three
yeah,
quarters of the movie is him like being nice to people, fostering kids, like helping everybody out, like fighting cancer. Like all of this craziness happens so that you give a shit when the fight happens.
yeah.
And I say that, but I boil it down because it's such it's a movie. It's ridiculous, right?
No,
But it's like
that's
no,
great.
it speaks to this human being of oh, I can't just go spend 200 million if nobody knows or nobody cares, nobody's attached to my movement,
Yeah,
you know? So I think that when the way our brains are wired is when we are able to sit and hear, you know, Andrew speak on these podcasts at length and experience, and he's drawing ties back to the community and talking about the impact that it's going to have on truckers and like, okay, now I'm starting to like have this emotional connection. So when these other moments happen, or Joe Rogan finally hits after Sam Harris and what have you, I'm like, okay, now I'm rooting for this guy,
yeah.
and I think that is so, um, it's understood but understated. I think in marketing,
I definitely agree. I mean, so the so that's sort of like how we got to podcast, which was like legacy media didn't work, would never work. Ads didn't work. Stunts weren't working then and never did actually. And then the fourth one is like alternative media, and um, so that's where I tried getting us into all sorts of alternative media. Like I tried getting us posting on LinkedIn, like the LinkedIn Bros, if you remember that.
Yeah.
You know, Bros meaning Brose. I don't know if anyone ever saw it. Whatever. And then I tried getting us onto Quora and podcast was the one that I also was like, well, I was like, this is going to be the one. But the ultimate idea here was like, okay, so we have those sort of methods of having any chance at breaking out. But the whole idea that I had was like, the day we break out, the podcast isn't going to get him credibility. What will is having like a community that can yell and scream and real people. And so, like with any like startup sort of approach, like we had our adoption curve. Our niche early adopters were the four audiences I mentioned. And my view was like, okay, once this podcast happens, once we get this big hit, I'm going to funnel everyone into a community in one place. And I like to call this a house party analogy, which is like if you have an empty house, if you're throwing a house party, you have an empty house, and people start showing up. Your first like 5 or 10 people there are super valuable because like
Hmm.
if you're like a loser and you're trying to throw a party, and you somehow get 10 people in there. They have to have a great time, and most importantly, you also have the ability to determine what the mood of the party is. Like you can sit there and you can pull out a tequila bottle and like yell shots, and like that sets a tone. Like so what I did is like ultimately, obviously, Yang gets on Joe Rogan, all these people start funneling in, and I shuffle everyone to a Facebook group and our Reddit groups and like a Twitter community. And I literally sat in those groups and I set the culture, which was like, okay, guys, like I would literally go on there and be like, here's a list of like Reddit blogs to go like dominate. Here's a list of like journalists who are like not putting Yang out in their articles. And it set this culture of like, oh, what we do is like we attack, like we go online and we like spread information. And I would like get on Yang's Facebook and I would go in there and be like, hey guys, like love the work you're doing, like let's keep fighting online. It really set this already online audience to adopt this sort of like weaponized presence online. And so I was like, that's what's going to win us credibility. And truly it really did happen. I feel like it's one of those things where it's like um, this gets to the original question that you had, which was like, so what happens when you blow up? Once all that happened, I personally did not feel like responsible for it, even though I had sat there manifesting this strategy for like 6 to 9 months. There's sort of this like doubt that still lived within me from 2018 when I was like failing, where I was like, no, like no, you're just like, no, it probably wasn't me. You keep doing those things, but you continue to have this doubt. And I mean, there's a story related to that, but I don't know if we'll have time for it. Um, to speak specifically to the question that you had asked of like what happens when you do scale up, which is, well, once Yang did blow up, because eventually he got on Joe Rogan, and the way he got on Joe Rogan, which was Sam Harris just hit up Joe Rogan, was like, hey, you should have this guy on. But that took 6 months of the Sam Harris podcast audience loving Yang so much that I guess they like got Sam Harris to do it or something. But so then we go on Joe Rogan, and then we did actually blow up overnight, and we went from raising $20,000 a month to raising about $1 million a month immediately. I mean, it was insane, and we went from about 10 people on staff to 300 in about 4 months. Uh, and it was without a doubt the hardest time of my life. One of the things in startups and entrepreneurship is you always prepare your infrastructure to scale on the outside. So I was like totally readying everything to like make sure we got all the value of everyone who showed up. But I spent zero time preparing for what it meant to hire 15 people on a marketing team. And I think everyone internally was not ready for that. And so it became a shit show a little bit. I mean, just like scaling that fast is very crazy. We figured it out by the fall, but yeah, I mean, it was a little crazy.
No, definitely. Those are those moments, right? Where you're like, okay, it's to your point, right? We've built out this funnel. I've really conceptualized this when people come, but I haven't thought about how I'm going to manage folks and what's going to happen when there's infighting amongst people below, and how do we handle that, and like there's all these other infrastructural things that you have to take care of that are like they're just it's mental power. And when you're already, to your point, you're out
Wow.
there, you're fighting, and you're like, okay, we're a challenger candidate, we're trying to get more and more market share, more eyeballs, more voters, etc. And it's like if everyone's not rowing in the same direction, it can be, and it's like, okay, I got to go correct that quickly to make sure that we can get back on course.
Yeah.
Um, I love that though, this idea of, you know, preparing for the moment, and then also I something that I think anyone listening can really benefit from. You had one KPI: get on Joe Rogan. Doesn't matter how it happens, if it's via cold outreach or if it's his buddy texting him being like, "Hey, come on this show." Um, that to me is like, I because I think we can get drowned out in KPIs a lot of times in like what's, and then it starts to become, what KPI is the team focusing on, what's important, what's not, where are we, like, what's our digital coverage like in this suburb of Iowa, blah blah blah, and it starts to get so granular to that, which is, there's a time and place for it, but it's also like, what massive swings and wins can we have that will exponentially grow us, right, and
Yeah.
give us a chance, and then to, your job is just giving the product a chance as a marketer, right, get it out in front of people, and then Yang's got to go kill it on the show. And then
Yeah.
it's like all of that stuff where it's like, okay. Um, but I love this idea of like, prepare for the moment, have this really like these champion kind of like metrics or things you're going after from a project standpoint. Um, and then I think coming back to like the start of it really is like, find things you're aligned with, right? And then it just makes it that much harder to go forward and market them. So I really enjoyed this, Andrew. Before I let you go, let people know, where can they follow along with your journey or follow you online, learn more.
Yeah. Well, my website is andrewfrawley.com. Um, and my Twitter is tweet at Andrew. Those are where I'm most active right now, which is uh, semi-active. I I was planning to spend the summer writing as I'm looking to transition my career into policy around psychology and government and like how we can have more psychologically informed social systems. But right now, I'm just studying so much that I'm actually not writing. I realized I needed to do some of that before I really started writing all my crazy ideas out in public.
No, that's fair. Awesome. I will put links to both of those in the show notes page so you all can go down, click, get that. Andrew, thanks again for coming on the show today, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan.
All right, everybody. That's it for this episode. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Shelton. I'll catch you